Prime Minister says no more COVID restrictions for now as the Omicron variant continues to spread. With questions about what COVID might do to Christmas, Boris Johnson met senior ministers but decided against tighter rules for the moment.
Unfortunately, I must say to people, we will have to reserve the possibility of taking further action to protect the public.
1 million jabs were delivered across the UK on Saturday, but Labour says the uncertainty over Christmas shows a lack of leadership from the Prime Minister.
We've got a government that's hinting at further restrictions, but it's more concerned and tied up with party management at the moment than it is with public health.
With senior ministers reportedly split over what action to take, we'll be asking what sort of Christmas we should expect. Also tonight, pubs and restaurants say time is running out for government help as they're hit by mass cancellations due to COVID. The trade in fake COVID passes on the dark web and on social media. And victory for Australia in the second Ashes test in Adelaide. They now lead 2-0 in the series.
Coming up in Sports Day later in the hour on the BBC News channel, Arsenal, the only British side left in the competition, have found out who they're going to face in the Women's Champions League quarter-finals.
Good evening. The Prime Minister has ruled out bringing in new COVID restrictions in England for now, but said the government wouldn't hesitate to take further action to protect the public if needed. Boris Johnson said the data on COVID was being monitored hour by hour as the Omicron variant continues to spread with speed across the country. He was speaking after chairing an emergency cabinet meeting this afternoon amid reports of splits among senior ministers over whether to tighten the rules. Earlier, the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, refused to rule out a Christmas lockdown, saying it wasn't possible to make hard, fast guarantees. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, accused the government of a vacuum of leadership. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young.
The decorations are up and some of the presents are wrapped. The streets of Bristol were busy today, but Christmas during a pandemic comes with huge uncertainty. At the back of everyone's mind, will our festive plans again be thrown into disarray? After a 2-hour meeting with his cabinet, Boris Johnson said the arguments were finely balanced.
We agreed that we should keep the data from now on under constant review, keep following it hour by hour. And unfortunately, I must say to people, we will have to reserve the possibility of taking further action to protect the public and to protect public health, to protect our NHS. And we won't hesitate to take that action.
The government insists it's not sitting back doing nothing. Manchester City's football stadium among the sites helping get vaccinations up to a record 1 million on Saturday. People have already been told to work from home, use COVID passes and take tests before socialising. Not enough, says the Labour leader.
Throughout the pandemic, my strong feeling is that the government has been too slow. But here we are with a variant that everybody's very, very concerned about. And what I want to see is a government, a Prime Minister, that gets a grip and puts a plan forward that hopefully we can all get behind.
Other parts of the UK have already gone further. In Scotland, guidance has been issued that no more than 3 households should meet indoors. Wales has put guidance in place for the run-up to Christmas and will introduce tougher legal restrictions on the 27th of December. For days, there's been a growing sense around here that more restrictions for England are inevitable. But Cabinet ministers haven't been convinced by the data. Many of them are worried about inflicting more economic harm before they've seen a fuller picture of just how dangerous this new variant is. Many Conservatives don't want more measures. Lord Frost resigned as Brexit Minister at the weekend, partly blaming the government's pandemic response.
I don't support coercive policies on COVID. The Prime Minister's got some very difficult decisions to take and I'm sure he'll be thinking very hard of them.
Critics accuse Downing Street of lacking moral authority when it comes to rules after another photo emerged, this time of the Prime Minister, his wife and 17 staff in the garden drinking wine during the first lockdown. The Prime Minister says they were people at work talking about work. Many voters won't see it that way. scientific advisers want more action now. Mr Johnson is weighing up his next step. Now, throughout this pandemic, there's been that debate, hasn't there, between bringing in new restrictions which protect the NHS, which can save lives, but against, of course, the downsides for the economy, for people's mental health, for education. Now, those arguments are raging, and they're raging around the Cabinet table. On Saturday and today, lengthy meetings where this is discussed and Cabinet ministers talking about it. Now, I think what is really interesting here is that they are far more reluctant to sign off on these measures than they once were. But listening to the tone of what the Prime Minister had to say, it really still feels as if it's a matter of when, not if, and I'm afraid that means more uncertainty.
Vicky, thank you. Vicky Young there, reporting from Westminster. Well, a key factor for ministers is how well the NHS might cope should rising infection rates lead to greater demands for hospital care. There are fears that staff shortages may also hit the NHS as people are forced to isolate with COVID. Here's our health editor, Hugh Pym.
The NHS is braced for a wave of hospital cases in the weeks ahead. But they don't know how big that'll be. What they do know is that COVID is already taking its toll in the shape of higher staff absences. The NHS Employers Group told me that staff sickness is a particular problem in London.
Members have reported to us a really dramatic increase in levels of absence over this last 10 days. 3 or 4 times more people off sick now compared to 10 days ago. The fear is that we see the same pattern of absence replicated across the country.
Even if Omicron generates a surge in mainly mild infections, that'll have an impact on the public sector and the wider economy, with some employees needing to isolate. That's another reason why ministers and health officials are pushing the message about booster jabs, including front-page newspaper ads today. The UK has moved relatively quickly with the booster rollout. Israel is ahead, but they started sooner. The UK, though, has moved more rapidly than some other leading economies. Within Great Britain, where data is available, there's a varied picture. The darker shades show higher take-up, the lighter shades lower. And that's looking at all those who'd had their first and second doses by the end of September, who then went on to have a booster. The figures for Wales are 1 week behind England and Scotland, which is why booster take-up looks less advanced. York was one centre today where people were queuing for boosters.
If the vaccine does help, then you may as well get it done. There's no harm that we know of.
We've just got to do what we're, in theory, told, and hopefully this will help slow the Omicron and everything else that goes with it.
I think it's important to get a booster or a vaccine if you haven't had a vaccine yet, to just try and help to protect people and protect yourself.
Brilliant, all done.
From today in England, the 12 to 15 age group have been able to book second doses, and this centre in Harrogate did the honours for some of the first takers.
Being protected from COVID is really important for people my age and for my family.
Just to get the vaccine so I can protect people around me and myself, so I'm not under risk more when I'm around bigger groups of people.
Just what impact Omicron will have is far from clear, but the health service is having to prepare for the worst while hoping the outcome will be less severe than some have predicted. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
There we go. Let's look now at the latest official data on the pandemic in the UK, and there were 91,743 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. The average over the past week is now more than 83,000 new cases every day. 44 deaths were recorded. That's of people who died within 28 days of a positive test. 112 COVID-related deaths were recorded on average every day in the past week. On vaccinations, more than 770,000 people a day have had boosters on average in the past 7 days, bringing the total to almost 29 million. Let's go back to Hugh, who's with me. Hugh, given that data, where do you think we are in this pandemic?
Well, Reeta, those latest daily reported cases above 91,000 is up on yesterday's number, but Sunday does tend to see a bit of under-reporting. Crucially, it's the underlying trend we need to look at week on week, and cases are up about 61%. Now, hospital admissions are up a lot less, 6% week on week. But of course, they tend to be a bit of a lagging indicator. It's 2 weeks or more from the moment someone tests positive that they're likely to need hospital treatment. The other important fact, really, about hospital admissions is that they're very much concentrated in London in terms of a surge in COVID. 1,800 patients in hospital with the virus, up 500 or nearly 500 on the week. But that's not replicated in other English regions or the nations. It's fairly flat. So the big question is, will London, being the epicentre, result in a spread beyond that or not? So there's not a lot of really new information for ministers to consider as they deliberate on what to do in terms of possible new restrictions in England. They're obviously weighing up the impact on the economy. They're looking at the possibility that there's just higher immunity now because of the success of the booster programme. There's the argument that by imposing restrictions, you just push the problem further out into the spring. But the other side of the argument is, if you're going to take action to try to bring the peak down, to give more time, then you need to act sooner and harder than you'd otherwise like to do. That's the view of government advisers.
Hugh, many thanks. Health editor Hugh Pym there. 24 hours to save businesses from a Christmas crisis. That is the stark warning from two of the biggest names in the restaurant and pub industry to the government tonight as cancellations decimate festive takings. Hospitality is not the only industry struggling. Gyms, hairdressers, theatres and hoteliers have all added their voices to the call for financial support from the Chancellor. Our Consumer Affairs correspondent Coletta Smith has been to Stockport to find out how firms are managing.
So this is the Cheshire Suite. Usually, we would have Christmas parties in here.
There's no festive buzz this week. Normally packed with guests for Christmas meals and work parties, there's not a single diner here today. Business has dropped off a cliff, and there's only so much deep cleaning and polishing the staff can do. With so little trade, manager Rob is facing difficult decisions.
So we've actually closed off one of the floors in the hotel. For the staff that we have on board, we have to either put them on holiday or we just can't give them hours. And at this time of year, that's when it really impacts them because, they have families to provide for.
Down the road at this Italian chain, they've had 3 lunch cancellations already today. There's staff to pay, but not enough customers to serve.
If you want to close us and create some kind of circuit breaker, then close the industry and give meaningful support. If you're not going to do that, then let us get on with trading and stop scaring the public into not coming out. It's absolutely crucifying an industry.
Other industries are joining the call for help, with half of all West End productions hit by COVID this weekend. Rather than packed performances, the biggest players in the theatre world say the industry is now in a dreadful state. Out-of-town retail parks have seen higher shopper numbers these last few days than most high streets like this right across the UK that have been taking a real hammering. Sophia opened her first ever physical shop 5 months ago and is heartbroken to only be seeing a handful of customers each day now.
I've never been open for a Christmas before, but I have worked in retail before, so I know how it should be. And this is not what I was expecting, especially when you compare it to the start of December, where I really started to see things kind of busying up. And then in the past week alone, it just seems to have dropped off a cliff.
The government says it's still deciding how to provide ongoing support to the sectors affected. But without customers or government support, the next few days are crucial. Coletta Smith, BBC News in Stockport.
And as record numbers of infections continue to be recorded in the UK, Danny Savage has been talking to people in York about whether they're considering changing their plans for Christmas.
This is exactly how many people fear Christmas will turn out this year. But before any new restrictions are announced, they're making the most of it. York today was busy, but everyone has one eye on next Saturday.
If the government tells you to change your behaviour this week and brings in new restrictions, how would you feel about it?
Fairly resentful, I think, in light of their shenanigans last Christmas, which is why, to be honest, I think they haven't. I don't think they could look the nation in the eye after what they've done and expect people to follow plans that they haven't followed themselves.
I run a social club in Middlesbrough. So it's actually, it's crippled the club. So could be out of a job in New Year.
I don't think I have any choice, do I?
Sylvia is from Slovakia. She'd like to be with her relatives, but yet again can't be.
I would love to go and see my family in my country, which I can't do at the moment. And it's been like that for the last 2 years, so I miss my family.
In London especially, case numbers are rocketing. It's putting people off visiting. People like Jane from Lancashire, who was looking forward to a family reunion.
We haven't seen my husband's family in London since January 2020. We miss them, we love them, we'd love to see them, but on balance, we felt this was the wisest decision.
In Scotland, people have been told to socialise less and limit gatherings to 3 households. In Wales, nightclubs will shut next week, and there's a meeting on Wednesday about the next move in Northern Ireland. Back in York, not everyone is pledging to toe the line.
Would you go along with it? Because it might not be law, it might be advisory.
No, I wouldn't. No, I don't think we should be told or dictated to by the government, who can't stick to the rules themselves, that we should be abandoning by their rules that they break themselves.
Once again, it feels like we're on the coronavirus merry-go-round of restrictions. The question is, when is it going to stop again? Danny Savage, BBC News, York.
Let's take a look now at how other countries are responding to the rise of Omicron. In a moment, we'll hear from our correspondents in Washington and in Johannesburg. But first to our Europe correspondent Imogen Folks, who's at a ski resort near the Swiss capital, Bern.
Across Europe, governments are rushing in new COVID restrictions in the Netherlands. There's a lockdown. Denmark is thinking about a curfew. And here in Switzerland, doors are closed to the unvaccinated. To get into a bar or a restaurant, the theatre, a museum, a football match or your local gym, you will need the COVID certificate. It shows whether you're vaccinated or whether you've recovered from COVID. A negative test won't get you in. It's the Swiss government's answer to vaccine hesitancy. A third of the population here still hasn't had a first jab, and infection rates are rising fast. They're far higher than Switzerland's neighbours, France or Italy. But like last year, the Switzerland won't close its ski slopes. They stay open, including for now, for British tourists. But to enjoy any of the après-ski, everyone will need that COVID certificate.
Here in North America, Omicron has been found in almost every state, with people now forming long queues to get tested ahead of the holidays. Scientists are warning of a viral blizzard hitting the country. Average daily COVID infections are running at 160,000. That's more than double what they were in early November. But vaccination rates are not going up by anything like what the White House wants to see. Only half the jabs are being given today compared to April. In some states, in the South and West, fewer than 50% of eligible adults are double jabbed. Sporting and entertainment venues are closing down, and in a country that's seen 800,000 COVID deaths, President Biden will try this week to persuade the doubters that it's masks and vaccines that will stop that number rising further.
The news here in South Africa continues to be encouraging. The death rate and hospital admissions are still significantly lower than they were at similar stages of previous waves of the pandemic. There are also some encouraging signs that the number of infections, which rose so dramatically here, is already beginning to tail off. Does that mean that Omicron is less severe? That is not clear. For a start, the population here is far younger than in, say, Britain. And also, while vaccination rates here are low, most people have some immunity because of prior infections. It's worth pointing out that masks here continue to be compulsory in public, and most people abide by that. The government, however, is not yet imposing any other significant restrictions to handle Omicron.
Andrew Harding in Johannesburg ending those reports. The time is 19 minutes past 6, our top story this evening. The Prime Minister says no more COVID restrictions for now as the Omicron variant continues to spread. And coming up,
Festive football in England goes on as emergency meetings end with a collective agreement to press on with matches where safely possible.
Coming up in Sports Day in the next 15 minutes on the BBC News channel, where did it all go wrong for England's cricketers and how can they put it right in Australia to keep themselves in the Ashes series?
The BBC has discovered that COVID passes are being advertised for sale on social media to people who haven't been vaccinated. Cyber investigators have also found sellers on the dark web claiming to provide coronavirus documentation that's been added to the NHS database. Our business correspondent Caroline Davis has the story.
Weapons, drugs and stolen goods. But the dark web has a new item for sale: COVID vaccination passes.
It's selling them for countries ranging from US and UK, Russia, France, Switzerland, Greece, all the way through to Latvia, Morocco, Austria, Estonia.
Jonathan Benton runs a cybercrime investigations company. His team have found multiple sellers claiming to sell COVID passes from around the world.
We were finding passes, certificates, cards, vaccine cards, choice of, even down to choice of what vaccine you wanted recording on the card. They'll either be fraudulently obtained, so completely legitimate cards issued by a national authority, or, but then fraudulently completed, or they'll be a fraud, so it'll be a mock of the real thing, or it'll be a scam.
Some of the websites that you were showing me, they were saying that they had people on the inside who could update the data. How credible do you think that is?
Sadly, I'd say it's probably highly credible.
It's a risk that the authorities are aware of too. Last week, 3 men were arrested in London after NHS staff found potentially faked COVID-19 vaccination records on their systems. But how easy are these passes to find? Very, as it turns out, because some are advertised on Facebook. I've only been searching for a matter of minutes on social media, but I've already found multiple posts of people claiming to be selling NHS COVID passes along with QR codes to whoever wants them. Now, what's not obvious is if you did decide to go through with these, what exactly you would get, if anything. But it is clear that there are multiple people claiming to be selling these. Facebook's parent company, Meta, says that it prohibits anyone from buying fake or genuine medical documents and continues to identify and remove content whenever they find it. Sellers promoted these passes to help unvaccinated people travel, get into some venues, even secure certain jobs. But how many are in use? One Border Force union says that when officers were checking COVID documentation, they saw several every day. Now airlines do those checks, and fakes are hard to spot.
Because there's no common standard, really you're down to the very, very old-fashioned look at the grammar, look at the spelling, which is fine if you speak the language it's written in. But if you don't speak that language, you're really not going to spot it.
The government didn't respond to a request for comment, but trying to crack down on sellers is already proving complex. Caroline Davis, BBC News.
Premier League clubs have chosen to go ahead with festive fixtures despite ongoing disruption caused by COVID-19. The decision was taken after a meeting of all 20 clubs this afternoon. Well, our correspondent Laura Scott is at the Premier League's headquarters in West London for us now. Laura.
Well, the Premier League presses on for the time being. That's despite 6 of the 10 scheduled games over the weekend having been postponed due to COVID outbreaks among squads, and some managers and players having called for a so-called circuit breaker, effectively a pause on the season for at least one round of matches. Today, those in charge of the 20 clubs agreed a collective intention to press on with matches where safely possible. Of course, there is no guarantee how many of those matches will go ahead, given what we've seen recently. Clubs have been reminded that where they have 13 fit players plus a goalkeeper, they should fulfil their games. And the vaccination drive goes on. In the last hour, we've heard that 77% of Premier League players have now been double jabbed. That's up from 68% in mid-October. And to help the fixture congestion, the FA has agreed to scrap the 3rd and 4th round replays in the FA Cup. Elsewhere, the English Football League has also agreed to carry on with their season. That's despite 7 Boxing Day fixtures having been postponed. There is an acknowledgement that more cases and more postponements are almost inevitable. But today, for now at least, the festive feast of football goes on.
Laura, thanks. Laura Scott there. More than 370 people have died after a powerful storm struck the Philippines. The Philippine Red Cross has described scenes of complete destruction after the typhoon flattened homes, schools and hospitals. Many central and southern regions remain cut off, with power and communications lines down. Brighton and Hove City Council has been accused of dumping vulnerable people after several deaths in temporary accommodation outside the city. The council has moved hundreds of homeless people out of the area, removing them, say experts, from vital support. One of those who died had mental health issues and took her own life. Brighton says it doesn't usually place people with serious need outside its catchment area. Our social affairs correspondent Michael Buchanan has the details.
This is Kendall Court, a block of 54 bedsits that Brighton Council uses to accommodate homeless people. It's 10 miles outside the city in Newhaven, and the council have been repeatedly told it's not suitable for vulnerable people.
If you could imagine a mental health ward with no staff, yes, that was Kendall Court.
Margaret Winter's daughter Robin Rockman was placed in Kendall Court after applying for emergency housing in Brighton. A mature student, she was deemed vulnerable due to mental health problems, which deteriorated at Kendall Court. Just 3 weeks after being placed in the block, she took her own life.
I don't think she really wanted to die. I read her Facebook messages. In one of them, she said, "I don't want to die. I just don't know how to live." They should recognise that some people need more help than just a bed.
At least 10 Kendall Court residents have died since 2016, the most recent earlier this month. The people here often have complex needs, psychiatric or drug and alcohol problems.
Once you're put here and you get to see the people that are here and what goes on, it's like it's a dumping ground.
Leon Rose has lived here for 18 months after being released from prison. While he's grateful for the accommodation, like many others, he feels isolated from his family in Brighton.
There's no point putting someone somewhere and just forget about them. You know what I mean? When you put someone somewhere and it's temporary accommodation, surely you've got to be there to help them to move on to progress to better premises.
Being moved out of area is exceptionally difficult for people.
Dr. Tim Worthley is a Brighton GP who has cared for some of those who lived in the city but died elsewhere.
We've had people often moved out of area with severe mental health needs, with heart failure or with terminal cancer. We have people on the phone with us sobbing, really desperate for them to be moved back into the area so they can receive the care and support that they need.
Brighton and Hove councils say they have a larger homeless population than they can accommodate within the city. They rejected claims that Kendall Court was unsuitable for accommodating people and say that they don't usually place someone with major care needs outside Brighton. Michael Buchanan, BBC News, Sussex.
And if you've been affected by any of the issues in that report, details of organisations offering information and support with mental health are available at bbc.co.uk/action line, or you can call for free at any time to hear recorded information, and that's on 08000 155 998. A man has been sentenced to an indefinite hospital order after he was found responsible for the death of a 93-year-old fellow resident at a care home. Alexander Rawson, who was suffering from mental health issues, beat Eileen Dean to death with a walking stick at the home in southeast London. The court heard Rawson will be detained in a secure psychiatric unit, possibly for the rest of his life. US prosecutors have described Ghislaine Maxwell as a sophisticated predator during closing arguments in her criminal trial. The 59-year-old has denied grooming underage girls for abuse by Jeffrey Epstein between 1994 and 2004. She faces a lengthy prison sentence if convicted on sex trafficking and perjury charges. The sandwich and coffee shop chain Pret a Manger has received thousands of complaints over its drink subscription service, with customers saying popular beverages like fruit smoothies and milkshakes frequently run out or have been removed from the menu. The BBC understands the chain has received more than 5,000 complaints about the offer. The company says they are pleased with the response to the subscription and have spoken to regulators to ensure the firm's marketing of the offer meets the latest guidance. the Queen has decided to celebrate Christmas in Windsor rather than travel to Sandringham. A royal source said the decision was a personal one and reflects a precautionary approach. Members of the royal family will visit Windsor over the Christmas period. Now, it was defeat for England's cricketers in the second test in Adelaide. They lost to Australia by 275 runs and now trail 2-0 in the Ashes series. They were dismissed for 192 in their second innings on the final day. Patrick Geary reports.
Too good, 2-0. Australia might be missing their captain and the best bowler in the world. England couldn't further inconvenience them. Their aim had been to make the Aussies run out of time. Ollie Pope got through less than 10 minutes, 5 wickets left. The biggest of them was Ben Stokes, so Australia's fielders made an enclosure around him, then sent in a Lyon.
Oh, that looks very close.
Nathan Lyon thought he had him LBW. The umpire didn't. Australia reviewed, then rejoiced.
Wickets hitting.
England reset. Chris Wokes made a defiant 44. Jos Buttler, a natural cavalier, relied on his shield. No wicket fell for more than 2.5 hours. Say it quietly, maybe. But English optimism on this tour is no sooner formed than shattered.
Oh, too good.
The end of Wokes and ultimately hope. England dragged this into the evening. Still there, Jos Buttler, the Adelaide barricade. For so long, he'd hardly put a foot wrong until...
Oh, he's trotting on a stump. Oh, he has.
Watch the lights on the bails hit wicket, the last in a series of backward steps. England's Day 5 fight was too little, too late.
Australia win the test match. They go up 2-0 in the Ashes.
Can't just leave it to the last day and expect to pull off an enormous feat, which is what it would have been today. The disappointing thing about this week is that we made the same mistakes as last week. We just can't afford to do that.
It's 4,000 days since they last won a test in Australia. To regain the Ashes, they must now win 3 in a row. Patrick Geary, BBC News.
Time for the weather now. Here's Darren.
Hello there, Rita. As we head towards Christmas, there's going to be some big changes in the weather. From the middle part of the week, it turns more unsettled. That means some rain in the forecast, some milder air as well, and then a battle just in time for Christmas. Could the colder air return? More on that in a moment. It's pretty chilly out there at the moment. We do have a lot of cloud around, not the mist and fog that we've had recently, and some breaks in the cloud are likely across parts of Scotland, Wales and the northwest of England, so these areas more likely to have a frost. Mind you, temperatures will be close to freezing for many, except in the far southwest where there's more of a breeze, and in Northern Ireland where we've got this blanket of cloud keeping it pretty grey during tomorrow. But hopefully a bit more sunshine to come across England and Wales. Some eastern areas though could stay quite cloudy, and we'll see cloud across southern Scotland pushing its way into the central belt, so quite a chilly looking gloomy day here. Generally temperatures similar to what we had today and near normal really for this time of the year. But the weather is changing because the high pressure that's kept it quiet and settled is moving away, and instead this big area of low pressure swamping the Atlantic, and around it we have these bands of rain which will start to arrive on Wednesday. But we start with a widespread frost in Scotland, England and Wales. Bright start, it does cloud over. In the west, the wind picks up. That cloud brings some rain across Wales, Western England, Northern Ireland, pushing into Scotland, bringing in some mild air for western areas. But ahead of it to the east, it's going to be quite a cold feeling day, I think, during a Wednesday. Let's look beyond then. There's our area of low pressure. We see one band of rain pushing away, another one starting to come in for Thursday. This will bring some wetter weather northwards and eastwards, the wettest of the weather pushing its way up into Scotland. And as the rain clears away from Northern Ireland and much of England and Wales, we should actually see some sunshine. And those temperatures finally get a boost widely, getting up to 11 or 12 degrees on Thursday. Now, if you are going to be travelling on Christmas Eve, in the morning it could potentially be quite misty and murky with some areas of fog before we get some rain into the southwest. But by the time we get to Christmas, this is where the battle is taking place. Most of us will be in mild air, but there is a block of colder air in the far north, and with some bands of wet weather coming in from the southwest, hitting that colder air, if it is going to be a white Christmas, it could possibly be across some parts of Scotland. Rita.
Many thanks, Darren. Now, just before we go on tonight's News at 10, we have a special report from our Moscow correspondent Steve Rosenberg on the growing tensions between Russia and Ukraine.
We don't know what the Kremlin is planning, but what is clear from what President Putin has been saying is that 30 years after the fall of the Soviet Union, Vladimir Putin remains deeply resentful of how the Cold War ended, with Russia losing territory, influence and empire. And if Mr. Putin has decided that now is the moment to try to reverse that, that is a huge challenge to Russia's neighbours and to the West.
Well, that's all from BBC News at 6. So it's goodbye from me. And on BBC One, we now join the BBC's news teams where you are. Bye-bye.